I am live. I'm reading Joan Marshall Grant's book, Speaking from the Heart, about ethics, reincarnation, and what it means to be human. I had already started in chapter 4 earlier this year, but I decided to go back to the beginning, and I'm here in chapter 2 of this book, which was edited by Nicola Bennett, Jane Law, and Sophia Rossoff. It's about it's jottings and writings here mentioned which never got into a book. Anyhow, this is chapter 2. This describes her early years. On the 28th of December and on the 28th of October 1933, a group of 3 people, a man and 2 young women, stood huddled close to a sarcophagus in the Egyptian Gallery of the British Museum in London. It was early on a Saturday morning, and yet there were few people, just as they had hoped. The museum guard was out of sight, standing beside the exit. One of the young women, very slender, with large brown eyes and rich reddish-brown hair, pulled back into a knot at the nape of her neck, quickly glanced round to check that the coast was clear, then put her hands on the cold stone and closed her eyes. In a low voice, she began to speak. I can see a very tall man. He has a coffee-colored face and heavy black brows. I can see black hieroglyphs. They are on white. They are on his white robe. He is standing at the head of the sarcophagus and making passes over it with his hands, 2 fingers outstretched. Eyes still closed, she tipped her head back. It's a huge stone building. She turned her head, exploring a space her companions could not see. Large pillars, flowers wreathed up the pillars. There's chanting, Horus Anubis. She imitated the sonorous voice of a ritual, then paused as if watching. Now the priest is making an invocation to the dead man. This shall be to the spirit, as water to the thirsty deer, as food to the famished, as fire to the cold, as shade to the parched, as succor to the sick, as comfort to the dying. A loud voice cut through the museum air. A guide ushered her party past them. When footsteps and voices had receded, she began placing her hands on the stone, and her 2 companions saw her go under, like a swimmer. The sarcophagus is being carried on the shoulders of men wearing white robes. There are about 10 on each side, but it also seems to be dragged by white oxen with garlands round their necks. Looking girls walk in front carrying flowers. It's a triumphant procession. There's no feeling of gloom about it. Wait, I can see more. The temple is on a little hill. Then there is a small sandy valley, quite shallow, about a mile broad or maybe a little further, and on the far side, jagged rocks. The procession is winding downhill towards those rocks where the tomb is. The sky is very blue. Listen, they're chanting. Head on one side, concentrating, she was mouthing unfamiliar syllables. I think it means something like this. He who has been a god among men has gone to the god among his brothers. The 3 people were Joan, Leslie, and their close friend Hilary. Hilary Durham Matthews. It was at King's Beeches, Hilary's family home, that Joan had discovered she could do psychometry, the psychic practice of touching an object and retrieving its memories. In her autobiography, she describes her surprise when visual images appeared as though I were seeing them through a third eye. Set between and slightly above my eyebrows. Excited by the discovery, the three of them had rushed off to the British Museum so Joan could try out her new skills. The sarcophagus of Neskitiwu was the first of many hooves, as Joan would come to call them, to be scrupulously recorded and dated by Leslie. His typescripts reveal that they returned to the museum as soon as the following Monday, where Joan found herself witnessing a savage scene from ancient Assyria as she put her hands on a carving of a winged figure and bull that had once stood beside the doorway of King Argon's palace. At the head of a colossal flight of stone steps, from the foot of the steps stretches an avenue of crouching winged bulls with a double row of palm trees behind them. Up the avenue is approaching a procession of returning warriors. Between them are lots of people bound with rope who are being lashed with thonged whips, the thongs being tipped with metal. There are bullocks carts loaded with treasure. People fall down and die in the sand and are kicked and goaded. The goats are about 18 inches long. The goads are about 18 inches long. The picture is as if seen from the doorway, as if the mental picture is from the soldier guarding the door. Although the scene was very brutal, I seem to take it quite unmoved, as though it were commonplace. Men, women, and children are tied to carts. Wheel of ox cart goes over a woman's chest, who has fallen down and crushes it. On one of the carts, surrounded by soldiers, is a golden bull or cow with jeweled necklace, the size of a large calf. It has been captured from the temples of the captured people. It is lashed upright to one of the carts with grass ropes. The people look up to it in despair. It was their God, and their hope has gone because they cannot understand why it does not strike their captors. Women's wrists tied to the spokes of one of the cart wheels so that they have to stoop as they turn. As they fall with exhaustion, they are dragged on and their wrists are broken. Joan saw the king being carried out on a litter covered in gold, wearing a high crown, cylindrical, rather like a mitre, but higher and round, made of gold, with rows of square jewels and enamel. He gives judgment, but before his fell orders can be carried out, they were, and by this point it was a relief, interrupted, and she did not have to watch the woman being thrown to the soldiers. A couple of evenings later, a little group assembled at Joan and Leslie's house to witness her psychometrized fragments of stone collected from archaeological sites in Scotland. The following Saturday, they visited the antique market in London's Caledonian Road and returned with two objects for Joan to practice on: a metal statue of a bishop and a horse amulet. That evening, Joan found the bishop contained nothing more interesting than convincingly realistic scene of an Elizabethan market. A long cobbled street, very dirty. A runnel, gutter or drain. Down the middle, overhanging black and white houses. Upper stories jutting out. Stores of meat and lots of smaller things. This is on a stool with lots of similar articles. They seem to be mementos of a place, much as you buy crested china now. However, the horse amulet rewarded her with more dramatic images of a 14th century crusade. These were struck to the worn on the these were I'm sorry, these were struck to be worn on the horses of the followers of each knight on the crusade as a form of identification of the horses. They were then polished very highly. She explained and broke off to comment that it was a lovely picture, like looking at a colored cinema. In 1933, Technicolor was a very new phenomenon. Had she seen colored cinema? Or was she saying that this is what she imagined it would look like if she had? Psychometry became our favorite game for several months, wrote Joan. But as it usually gave me a headache, I was not as keen on it as my audience. It was hard work, which none of them realized. But when they could produce something likely to contain an interesting story, I was usually willing to oblige. Rings, statues, African jewelry, swords, furniture, and knickknacks produced glimpses of other times, often dated and long dead people, often named, but Joan knew that with work she could develop her gifts to do more than provide an evening's entertainment for her friends. Here are a few examples included not for their teachings, but for interest in how Joan worked and developed her abilities. The first record the first records a trip she took with Leslie and Hilary in the first flush of enthusiasm down to Avebury, the famous Neolithic stone circle in Berkshire, not far from the more famous Stonehenge. Avebury, 5th November 1933. Conditions difficult, very cold, people passing, and I was rather tired. The Arn stone. Could get no results. My fault. The diamond stone. Now this stone aforetime was shining white, like salt. Not quite as bright as salt. It was a true diamond, with brightly polished sides. He that stands within my shadow shall go in peace of the spirit, rest to the body, comfort to the mind. At once the turbulent waters were stilled by the will of the Master in the great storm that overtook us on the journey from the land whence we came. There is a picture symbolic of this, of a curious square proud boat made of white stone or stucco, in the brow of which stands a man with his hand outstretched, as Moses where he stilled the bodies. There's a great storm raging. There appears across the waters a smooth path, like the path of moonlight across the sea. The path always starts from the boat to the horizon, like moonlight, as the hand of a mother can comfort a crying child. So shall this power of thy Master calm your turbulent heart, as a light in the darkness to a frightened one. So shall the light of this cure the fear of your soul. The Watcher's Stone. The stones were part of the outer ring. The stones were very near together, with curtains, Rittel and Daub or something that joined the stones to make a solid wall between. Between the two circles were tents. Also, in the inner circle, when the weather was cold, the inner circle may have been a temple. The entrance to the outer ring was between here and the next stone. There was a huge pair of wooden gates. On these outer gates was the sun half risen, and on the inner gates a full sea of gold, with a blaze of rays spreading all the way round. The people outside used to bring offerings of food, such as lambs, not sacrifices, but merely presents to the priests. There seemed to be many passwords according to what part of the temple they were going to, for some came to succor the dead and some to succor the living. This means the different lines of training, the first unearth binding, etc., and the second healing, etc. I was not very satisfied with the results obtained today, as I felt tired, both from the drive from London and also because I had come, I had done a lot of this the previous evening. I did not try hard for results on the spot, as they were a lot of people as there were a lot of people about, and we had come down chiefly to get chippings of the stone to do later. So I make a break here because it's getting rather dark and I have problems reading it. Today is Tuesday. It's the 6th of August. Good night.